Good morning, Morai v'Rabotai, Bruchim Habayim. We are continuing our Masechet Rosh Hashanah, and we are on Daf Yud Bet, Amud Aleph, by the two dots. Uli Rakot, today's Amud, is being learned as is Chut Refuah Shalema for Daniel Moshe ben Farangis v'Avraham, Rachel Simcha bat Nahid, and Shira bat Chemda. Today's Amud is also being learned in Leilu Nishmat, Esther bat Naftali Tzvi Alevi, and Leilu Nishmat Betzalel ben Rafael v'Esther, that the Neshamot should have an Aliyah Be'ezrat Hashem. Amen. This month's learning of the community has been graciously dedicated by the Mahbubi and Shei families. It should be an ultimate zchut for all the mishpachot. Amen. So we finished a fantastic discussion that started up on Daf Yud, Amud Bet, on the bottom of the Amud, the world history marks of what happened when, Nachloket between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yehoshua, including when the world itself was created. Was it Betishre Nivra Ha'olam? Was it Benisan Nivra Ha'olam? And we went back and forth. The one that is interesting to note is that unlike what we would have thought, Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yehoshua, they have a discussion of when the world was created, and Rabbi Yehoshua, who normally the halacha is like him, because Rabbi Eliezer is shamuti, right? We don't paskin ever like Rabbi Eliezer almost, because he either was a Talmid of Beit Shammai or he was in Shamta. Shamuti means he was in a nidui, and therefore halacha is not like him. And he's the one that says Betishre Nivra Ha'olam, at the same time that Rabbi Yehoshua says Benisan Nivra Ha'olam. Now we would expect the halacha should be like Rabbi Yehoshua, the Benisan Nivra Ha'olam, right? Now the last piece of the Gemara, we're going to read it together and then come back to discuss maybe one or two Tosafot and perhaps something to take home with. The last piece of the Gemara in the culminating two lines at the end, the Gemara says, Tanu Rabbanan, Chachmei Yisrael monin lemabul k'Rabbi Eliezer. Chachmei Yisrael count for Mabul, which means not just the Mabul of Noach, but the world history, the Briyat HaOlam, right? And the Mabul, which again, this is before Nisan, before we became a nation. So the world history, including the Briyat HaOlam, they count from Tishrei, like Rabbi Eliezer, says the Gemara. And for Tkufot, for the seasons, they would count from Nisan, like Rabbi Yehoshua. That means that when the seasons actually started in the beginning of the creation, which really would start from the day that HaKadosh Baruch Hu put the sun and the moon up, that create the seasons, right? Every season, when we talk about Tkufot, how long is every season? Pretty much 91 days, really, right? 91 days and 7.5 hours. Now, 91 days is exactly 13 weeks. Okay? So every tkufa starts 7.5 hours after the beginning of the previous tkufa, right? It's going to be same day, almost always. Same day, 7.5 hours after the beginning of the tkufa of the previous season. So every year, your tkufa moves basically a day and a half, a day and quarter, right? A day and quarter, because 7 times 4 is 28, and half times 4 is 2. So you have 30 days, 30 hours rather, for the change. That would be 24 hours plus 6 hours. So it's 1 day and a quarter. Every year it changes. The beginning of Tkufat Nisan this year and beginning of Tkufat Nisan next year will be. So it's important when you start, because whenever you start, every year it changes to Cheshbon the Tkufot. So that they would do from the Cheshbon of Rabbi Yehoshua, which means Benisan Nivra Olam. Now this already is confusing enough, because you're telling me that from the beginning of the Minyan HaShanim, they go with Rabbi Eliezer, which means really not just the Mabul, but the history of the world, including creation. But then you're telling me for Tekufot, which also depends on creation, they go from Nisan, right? That already is confusing. Aside from the fact that, by the way, we just mentioned that the whole Mabul thing over here, the Gemara said, it really depends on Machloket Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua. You remember that? Right? So how can you count this from that and that from this if they're both intertwined? So both of them happened in the same time. Everyone holds, up until now, everyone, meaning Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua, both of them hold, if this happened in Tishrei, that happened in Tishrei also, right? If creation of the world was on Tishrei, the Mabul also was from Tishrei, and vice versa. If that was in Nisan, the Mabul also was in Nisan. So this is like a third option over here, that Chachmei Israel say, no, creation was from Rabbi Eliezer, and Tekufot is like Rabbi Yeshua. We didn't have this third option. Until now, this is what the Gur Aryeh, the Maharal, in Bereshit actually, the Maharal has like an off tangent. He goes to explain this Gemara. He asks this question, wait, how does this work exactly? And the Maharal explains, he says, well, Chachmei Israel hold, no, it's not related in a way that they're locked in. You could say that Minyan HaShanim starts from Tishrei, but nevertheless the Kufot starts from Nisan, like Rabbi Yeshua. And then the Gemara, the Talmud Rabbanan ends, we're going to come back to this in just a moment. The Gemara ends at the end, Chachmei Umot HaOlam, the Goyish Chachamim, they hold Monin Af LeMabul Rabbi Yeshua. They count everything from Nisan, right? The Briat HaOlam is from Nisan, right? Noruz, all of that is from Nisan, and the world history also is from Nisan. Now, we already mentioned that here, even the way we explain Chachmei Israel right now, seems like we are counting the years of the world from Tishrei, like Rabbi Eliezer, right? And this, for those of you always send me questions after the shiur from the Tosafot that you all study on your own, really, the Tosafot in Daf Chet, Amud Aleph, the Tosfot asks this and says this. If you take a look at the middle Tosfot, it starts in the middle of the Amud Chet Amud Aleph. It's the long last Tosfot in the Amud. Velitkufot Rabbi Eliezer Da'amar Betishrei Nivra Ha'olam. The Tosafot there basically say we paskin like Rabbi Eliezer. Forget about this whole Shamuti thing. We follow Rabbi Eliezer when it comes to the Briat HaOlam, and again, hence, Hayom Harat Olam, Hayom Yamid B'Mishpat, right? Hayom Techilat Ma'asecha, right? Today, we say all these things are Rosh Hashanah. Today is the beginning of your work, right? Hayom Harat Olam, today is the pregnancy of the world, right? Like a hara. But there is another Tosafot that puts all of these things together again, not going through too much detail. If you take a look at the Tosafot in Daf Chaf Zayin Amud Aleph, and again, we're going to be revisiting this a little bit in Daf Chaf Zayin, but it's not fair to go off from this sugya without mentioning that the Tosafot in Daf Chet, the Gemara in Yud Aleph, Yud Bet, and the Tosafot in Chaf Zayin, they're really a combo together. Here, the Gemara says, Keman matzlinan ze hayom tchilat ma'asecha. So we say, ze hayom tchilat ma'asecha. Today is the beginning of your work, Hashem. And we say this on Rosh Hashanah. So how does it exactly work with Shita of Rabbi Yeshua, and the way we, generally speaking, deal with? But really, this is a question. We are paskening like Rabbi Eliezer. How does Rabbi Yeshua deal with that? I mean, when did we start saying this in the tefillah, so to speak, right? And the Tosafot says something fascinating. If you take a look at about 6 lines up from the bottom of the Tosafot, Omer Rabbeinu Tam, says the Tosafot. Rabbeinu Tam used to say, De elu ve'elu divrei Elohim chaim. Both of them are true, right? Rabbi Eliezer holds Betishrei Nivra Olam, Chazak u'Baruch, correct. Rabbi Yisraeli says, Benisan nivra olam. Right? Oich ames is also true. How does that work exactly? How does Rabbi Tam say that B'Tishrei nivra olam and Benisan nivra olam, both of them are correct? You're wondering how you can have such a machloket? Not only we have the machloket, but they're both true, right? Now this is obviously one of those things. The Gemara says this in Matzah Chagiga, Daf Gimel. We had this together. He says, how you may ask yourself, right? I have elu osrim, elu matirim, elu metameim, elu metaharim, right? And I'm confused. You may say. Says the Gemara, as af ata aseh ozdecha ka'afar keset. You make your ear like a funnel and take in the words of the osrim, the words of matirim, the metaharim, and the metameim, because all of them are divrei Elokim Chaim, right? They're all true. Which sometimes you read that Gemara and say, oh, okay, so some of the machlokets I could understand. But when you have diametrically opposed machlokets, especially if it's discussing a reality of what happened, like over here, it happened at some point, right? What does it mean? Benisan nivra olam, B'Tishrei nivra olam, both of them nivra olam. Now, what does that mean exactly, right? It's one of those difficult things to digest. And the Rabbi Tam says exactly that. Elu ve'elu divrei Elokim Chaim. Ve'ikar memar, and he explains, he says, the B'Tishrei ala b'machshava. In Tishrei was ala b'machshava. Hashem thought and planned the creation of the world. Livrot ve'lo nivra ad Nisan. And he wasn't actually created until Nisan. Right? We have this similar Gemara in Eruvin as well. We're all familiar with this Gemara in Eruvin because of Rashi and Chumash, right? That it was ala b'machshava that it should be one, and then it was two, right? In other words, ala b'machshava was that they should be two different things, and then they were one, and then separated, right? That's the way the Gemara answers the stira between Perek Aleph and Perek Bet of Sefer Bereshit, which has languages that are contradictory, right? Was it Behibaram? It was one unit, and then HaKadosh Baruch Hu separated them, or were they created separately? And the Gemara says, really, ala b'machshava, the plan was there should be two, and then they were created one. So it says the Tosafot, this is the same thing. Ala b'machshava in Tishrei, and the answer to this, meaning the havara, the understanding in this is that when we have plans, right? Because we have ala b'machshava, we think of something to do, and then it doesn't happen, we do something else, right? So the first thing is nothing. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu is not like this. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the ala b'machshava is a reality. The ala b'machshava of creation is always a reality. Sometimes it is so, like we say, lechadod is sof ma'aseh b'machshava tchila. Sometimes it's exactly the opposite of human beings. That the plan of the perfection of the world is really the ala b'machshava. For whatever reason, it can't be started like that, but it's a reality that is put in the DNA of the creation that would take effect at some point in some way. Every ala b'machshava of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it would be a reality that it is placed in the DNA of the world, unfolding reality that exists parallel with the reality that what actually happened in the creation. So therefore, ala b'machshava, to create the world in Tishrei, which we know, we just spoke about mazalot, the mazal of Tishrei is moznaim, right? Is the scale, is the judgment, is the din. The ala b'machshava was the world should be created with din. Because HaKadosh Baruch Hu is midat emet, and the world should be created with midat adin. The Chazal actually mentioned in the Midrash that HaKadosh Baruch Hu did create many worlds, right? To be exactly complete, it was 974 generations and worlds that HaKadosh created with midat adin, and he saw that it's not going to stand, right? Like the Gemara asks, the Gemara says, they asked the Torah, what should be done with the choteh? Someone sins, right? And the Torah said, should die, right? You sin, you betray the king, you'll be, that's a death penalty. And they asked it to the Chokhmah, to Nevuah, until they asked it to HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself. HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself said, he should do tshuva and live. That whole concept that had to be created, the concept of tshuva before the creation of the world, because the world would not stand with midat hadin alone, and therefore Chazal tell us HaKadosh Baruch Hu was shitef imo midat rachamim. Hashem mixed with that midat hadin some rachamim for the world to stand. So now you understand, right? This is like Bet Shammai that's always din, and Bet Hillel is more rachamim, and we say that la'atid lavo, the halacha would be like Bet Shammai, because la'atid lavo against sof ma'aseh machshava tchila will have like more of a perfect world that could be judged with midat hadin, but meanwhile it's midat rachamim. That's again the same thing that you have in Masechet Menachot, the fascinating and difficult Gemara about the story of Rabbi Akiva, when Moshe Rabbeinu goes up in the 40 days up to Shamayim and sees HaKadosh Baruch Hu writing the Sefer Torah and putting the tagim, putting the crowns of the letters, and he says, Mimakev al yadcha, what are these for? And Hashem says, Besof Kama Dorot, Rabbi Akiva is going to be this guy, Akiva ben Yosef, that's going to darshin tilim shel halachot, tons of halachot on every one of these crowns of the words. And Moshe Rabbeinu says, wow, I want to see him. Right? He says, sit back. He shows him the Torah of Rabbi Akiva. Moshe Rabbeinu was depressed looking at this. Says, wow, you have something like this and giving the Torah through me? Give it through him. He says, no. I said, okay, you showed me his Torah, show me his Sachar. And for whatever reason, instead of showing him his Gan Eden, HaKadosh Baruch Hu shows him the ending in this world of the combing of his flesh with the metal combs. And Moshe Rabbeinu says the immortal words, the Zot Torah vezu schara. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says shtok. What are the next words of the Gemara there? Shtok says, be quiet, Moshe. Kach ala b'machshava. Kach ala lefanai b'machshava. This is what my plans are. Now, kach ala b'machshava means midat hadin according to this, right? It says the din with the tzaddikim in this world sometimes has to be dealt with midat hadin in whatever way it's supposed to be, but that's kach ala lefanai b'machshava, which is according to what the Tosafot is saying over here. The whole thing of the world was created in ala b'machshava, in that level of creation, b'midat hadin, before it actually ended up being b'midat harachamim in Chodesh Nisan. So there are two parallel realities that were created. One is ala b'machshava, which is creation of the world with justice, with absolute justice, which is midat hadin. But that can't be the practical sense of the day-to-day world that we live in, because you would not understand, and hence, in reality, the physical world came together ben Nisan. So when we say Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yoshua, and comes Rabbi Tam and says, Elu divrei Elokim, it actually is Elu divrei Elokim Chaim. There are two realities in the creation of the world, two parallel realities, that one of them perhaps is more a balanced world, but the other one is a more truthful world. The world is going to come towards that in the language of the Ramchal, in Hanhagat, Gilui HaYichud, in the covered operation of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, beneath the surface, bringing the world to a level of perfection. That reality is always there. It may be beneath the surface, it may not be visible at all times, but it is always there. So that's a fascinating thing. Again, when we get to Daf Chav Zayin, we will come back to revisit this a little bit, but we had promised to speak about this 2 days ago. So here it is, the combination of the Tosafot in Daf Chet, the Gemara in Daf Yud Aleph and Yud Bet, and culminating with this beautiful words of Tosafot in Daf Chav Zayin Amud Aleph. So now we go weiter with the next words of the Mishnah. The Mishnah told us that this is also, Rosh Hashanah is also, the last item, is the Rosh Chodesh Tishrei is also Rosh Hashanah le'yerakot, right, for vegetables. So says Gemara, the Braita says, le'yerakot ul maserot. It's not just for yerakot, it's also for maserot. Now, what does it mean for yerakot, by the way? For maser yerek, right? Maserot means for, we're translating it, means for tvua, for grain, right? For produce. So, what exactly is, just say yerakot or just say maserot? Because when you say yerakot, also means maser yerek. So when you say masrot, you should cover that too, right? And our Mishnah doesn't even say masrot, it just says yerakot, right? The Braita is the one that says both. The Braita says it's the yerakot ul masrot. Now, obviously, when you read the Braita, you ask yourself, scratching your head, yerakot means masrot means maser yerek as well. So why say both of them? And that's exactly what the Gemara asks. Says the Gemara, Tana le'erakot u'masrot velin darim. So says Gemara le'erakot ma'ninhu. What is yerakot when you mention it in the Braita? Maser yerek. It means maser of yerakot. That means if I have, I pick up some vegetables and I have to give maser from them today on Erev Rosh Hashanah. So and then afterwards, 2 days after, which is after Rosh Hashanah, I pick some other yerek from the same quarter in my garden. I can't give maser from this on that and from that. And these are 2 different years. They have to be kept completely separate, right? Now we'll see more nafkaminas of it in Gemara, but that's what it means, right? Rosh Hashanah is the cutoff day for the year's maserot, and when we say yerek, means maser yerek. So says the Gemara, fine, but if it means maserot, why do you have to say yerakot and maserot? Why do you have to say 2 things? Says the Gemara, Tar Rabbanan v'Katari deoraita. The reason is, God says, "Ma'ninhu maser yerek, hainu maserot." It is the same thing as maserot. So why do you say yerakot and maserot? The Gemara answers, Tar Rabbanan v'Katari deoraita. Yerek is the Rabbanan, right? Maser yerek is the Rabbanan. Maser tfuah is the oraita. So therefore, the pasuk keeps them separately. Maser yerek and maser tevuah. The Braita is keeping them completely separate because there are 2 different levels of obligation, one rabbinic, one biblical. So says the Gemara, fine, but then in our Mishnah, it doesn't even mention the Masrot part. It only says the Drabanan, which is Yerek, and also in the Braita, when he mentions it, it says, Tana le'yerakot ul maserot. Which one does it say first? Yerakot. Which one is more important? Maserot. Why don't you just say it like a mensch? Just say it like the order that it should be. Logically, you should say the Doraita first and then the Rabbanan. So why do you say the Rabbanan first before the Oraita? Velitni the Oraita beresha. Let the Braita say, the one that has an obligation with the Oraita first. The Gemara says, no. It's counterintuitive because always the Gemara does this. The Gemara always mentions the Rabbanans first because chavivale, because it's a drasha de Rabbanan, and it's more precious because it comes from a drasha. It's not obvious why I read from the Chumash. It's more of a chidush. Because it's a drasha, it's a chidush, we always say the chidush first and then the obvious, right? It's not the importance of the levels, but the importance of the level of chidush that is involved, and therefore the Tana Rabbanan, because it is more ID, the chavivale in the language of the Gemara, because it is precious, it's beloved to the Tana because it's from a drasha, akdema, v'tana. Puts it first in the Braita. V'tana tidan, says the Gemara, our Tana of the Mishnah, who does not even mention the Doraita level, right? So it's one thing to put the Rabbanan before the Doraita, but not mentioning the Doraita altogether. Why do you only say Yerakot and not say Maserot to me? But Tana Tidan, Tana Rabbanan v'choshken Doraita. It tells you that the Rabbanan, which is more chaviv, more precious, more beloved, and for sake of shortening the words, he relies on our brains that we understand. Obviously, when you tell the Rabbanan, for sure is the Oraita as well. the Rabbanan ken deoraita tikun. So if I tell you that Rosh Chodesh Tishrei is Rosh Hashanah for Maserot of Yerek, you will also know on your own that it is for the Maserot of Tevuah as well. Fine. So this is the Gemara. Velitni Maser. Why do you say Maserot? You talk about Maser Tevuah, right? So just say Maser. Why do you have to say Maserot in a plural form? So says the Gemara, Maser Dagan. This is Echad Maser Dagan ve'Echad Maser Be'ema. So it says Maser Be'ema ve'Echad Maser Dagan. There's one of the Maser Be'ema, one of the Maser. You remember that Maser Be'ema, Rabbi Shimon was a little bit different. There's machloket about it, right? But here it says Artana, it says Masrot, which means Maser Be'ema and Maaser Dagan alike. Says the Gemara, V'litni Yerek. When you say leyerakot ul maserot, so you explain to me why maserot is plural form, why yerakot? Just say yerek, right? Why yerakot? Says the Gemara, because tregav de yerek. There are two different types of yerek when it comes to maserot. When on the clock do you become chayav b'maser for yerek? It depends what type of yerek, right? Some yerakot, the Gemara says, it brings from a Mishnah, yerek haneegad. If you have a type of yerek, a type of vegetation that the derech is to, you cut them off and you bundle them, cutting them off is not when you become chayav b'maser, but rather when you bundle them together. That's the completion of the harvest, so to speak. Mashenken, by a yerek that is not bundled, you just gather it, you cut it off and gather it. So when you put it, as soon as you take it off the ground and you put it in the kli, it becomes chayav b'maser. So therefore, there are two different types of maser yerek, and that is the reason for the plural language of ma'aserot and yerakot. So says the Gemara, Torah liket yerek erev Rosh Hashanah. If you gathered some yerakot on erev Rosh Hashanah before sunset, and v'chazar v'liket mishetavo hashemesh, and then you went back and you took some after shkia, which obviously doesn't mean that you did that on Leil Rosh Hashanah. It either means, the Rishonim write, it either means that a goy, your worker, did that night, or it means that you did 2 days later, which is also happens to be after the Shkia of Rosh Hashanah. It's just 2 days after the Shkia of Rosh Hashanah, which means after the cutoff date. So if you did that, then en torminu maserin mizalze. You cannot separate terumot to maserot from one bunch on the other, from one batch on the other, says the Gemara. Because you cannot give from the new ones, the fresh ones, on the old ones, and not from the old ones on the fresh ones. And now the Gemara is going to discuss a fascinating topic which we have brought up numerous times, of the different years of the cycle of Shemitah being different in the quality of the masrot that the person separates. We mentioned before that in the 3rd and the 6th year, you give maser ani, not maser sheni, right? On the other years, the 1st and the 2nd and the 4th, right? And the 5th, you give maser sheni, which you did yourself in Yerushalayim. Where do you see that in the Psukim? Right? It doesn't say it directly. We have to learn it from the Psukim, and that's going to be the discussion, the next upcoming discussion in the Gemara, because obviously if you are going from the Erev Rosh Hashanah of the 2nd year to the Rosh Hashanah of the 3rd year, then not only you cannot separate from one another, but they're completely two different levels of Maser. One of them is going to be Maser Sheni, the other one is going to be Maser Ani, which the Gemara is going to discuss, B'ezrat Hashem, in the next shiur.